Okay, principle 6 for focus, make peace with disapproval. So I'm sure if you're watching this, you're no stranger to receiving disapproval in your life. I certainly am not. Well, let's look at how we can manage disapproval, because as I mentioned earlier, disapproval can steer us away from our vision, steer us away from that focus on this process that's aligned with our vision of how we want to pursue our career and our lives. So another myth I'd like to explode is the myth of approval. The myth of approval is that people approve of people who do what they want them to do. And then if you work hard enough at it, you can gain the approval of those people. Well, I think the reality is that in the long term, people approve of people who approve of themselves. People that approve of themselves tend to have a lot of self-confidence, and I think people get tired of disapproving of them when they see that it's not affecting them. A few quotes about approval. Michael Porter, his course, Strategy 101, he says, is about choices. You can't be all things to all people. All right. Michael Dell, so at 19 years old, trying to construct homemade computers in his dorm room. His father said to him, "What are you trying to do?" His father wanted Michael to be a doctor. And Michael responded, "I don't want to be a doctor. I want to compete with IBM." Right? Everyone told him it couldn't be done, like home-built computers. There was no market for that. Well, as history now shows, it turns out there was. And that's the reality, is that disapproval can steer us from our goals. But if you have a goal that you really believe in, it's important to you, then you just keep going after it. We'll talk a little bit about how to, different strategies to do that. But it's important that you're able to handle disapproval. So what do I mean then when I say that people give you more approval if you don't actually seek their approval? Because approval can be either genuine or it can be manipulative. So there can be actually genuine approval or disapproval. Like, I really don't like the report you sent. Maybe I really don't like it, and so that's genuine. Or it can be manipulative. For example, someone may call you fat because they don't want you to keep losing weight and become attractive to others, because that makes them feel, by comparison, worse. There are so many ways that people can manipulate you with their disapproval, which is not even genuine. Another irony of disapproval is that you actually won't succeed if you pay attention to it. So, for example, let's say that your parents or others tell you, you should go right. You know in your heart of hearts you should go left. Well, if you go right, you'll fail at that because you're not going to really have your passion, your heart in it. And the irony is that if you do that and you take their advice and you fail at it, they will blame you. So the only way to win the approval of others is to do what you believe is right. And, sure, take the advice of others, take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes there's very good advice people give us, but it should always be filtered. You should always filter it with your own lens of what you really believe is right. Here's a new definition of disapproval: an emotional transfer from a stronger human being to a weaker one. If you accept that disapproval, then they have transferred this emotion to you and made you feel badly, or you've allowed that emotion to stimulate negative feelings inside of you. Well, you don't have to make that choice. It's like this. Let's say I have a gift for you, and I say, here's a gift of all this negative energy and like resentment and disapproval. Please take it, right? If you don't accept the gift, what happens to it, right? It stays with me. Disapproval is like that. It's a gift that others offer you. You can choose to accept it, or you can choose to not accept it. So let's take a look at a very interesting social psychological study about the effects of social comparison. So what are the effects of always seeking approval? So the television first reached mass penetration, at least in the US market. Actually, this was in Europe also, in the late 40s, early 1950s. So in 1951, the television was brought out to 34 cities in the United States. Well, a study was done that found that when the television entered the market, there was also a spike in crime. And this was a study by Hennigan and colleagues. And crime also went up right after the television was introduced into the market in those specific 34 cities. Well, in another 34 cities, there was a freeze on televisions because people were worried about the new technology, as people tend to do. And in 1955, the mayors of those cities allowed the television to be introduced. In those other 34 cities that received the television, or at first, its citizens were first able to buy the television in 1955, the spike in crime in those cities also went up right after 1955. So the researchers, what they came up with is that the reason that this is happening is because when people had television, they started to see others who, by comparison, seemed better off than they were. They started to feel worse about themselves. They started to feel deprived, and so they felt they needed to steal to get more. Do you know that one study of 584 Facebook users in Germany by Krasnova and her colleagues found that the most frequent emotion that Facebook users feel is envy? So we are living now in like a hyper social comparison society where we use social media. We see images on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Everyone puts on Facebook the one moment from their week-long family trip when they were actually happy. The one moment with their kids where the kids aren't throwing up on them or spilling food on the floor. We see just the accentuated moments where people show they want to show off and say, hey, look how wonderful my life is, and we tend to feel envy. And this relates a lot to focus, because what happens when we feel envy and we try to gather the recognition of others and the acknowledgement of others, and others saying, oh, wow, how wonderful we are. Well, we steer away from, remember that face forward slide, we steer away from our vision, our core values. We start going in other directions. And so, rather than spending, your time, or a lot of time on social media and other technologies, really like getting steeped in this kind of social comparison battle, focus is really about, focus on what you really care about. Don't worry what other people think. Right? The important thing is what you think.